This is the narrated PowerPoint on reading and writing about television. So, with reading and writing about television, there's a lot that we know and that we probably take for granted to some extent. How do you read television? Well, you read it in much the same way that you read other types of visual media, such as we've talked a little bit about advertising. When you look at an ad, what do you see? How do you think it appeals to its audience? Things like that. With television, what I mean by we take for granted a lot that we know about television in terms of how we read it. For example, when you walk into a room, how do you know if a sitcom is on, or a cop drama, or a reality show? You know actually a great deal about production. You know what a laugh track is, for example. When you walk into the room and you glance at the TV and you see that a sitcom is on, you know that it's going to last for about 30 minutes. If a cop drama is on, then you know that it's probably going to last for about an hour. So you do know actually quite a bit about reading TV. Of course, writing about TV does create some problems. For example, TV encourages passivity. So, and what I mean by that is that sitting and watching TV is passive, whereas reading a book is active. But the thing to keep in mind is that when you read TV, you are trying to render meaning. An example of what some of you have already done is I gave you the option of writing about the American family, of how a sitcom represents the American family. And so even if you just thought about that one and about what you might write, even if you didn't, then you, in a sense, you were reading TV. So a little bit more on what is the difference between reading a book and watching TV. When you read a book, you're more in charge. You decide when you start, you decide how long you read, when you stop, and so forth. You can scribble notes in the margins if you want to do that, or use a highlighter. And you don't do any of that with TV. So it is more passive. Another thing about TV that makes it a little bit different from a book is that the author is unclear. Even though we kind of take for granted the fact that when we pick up a novel, it may say, Stephen King on the spine or whatever for the author, but there's always an editorial team behind that. With television, that's a little more obvious. I think we're familiar with how film is done in general, that you have a writer of the script, you have a director, you have people who work the cameras and the audio and so forth, and then you have the actors. So, but we don't think of the author of a television show as being the same as the author of a book. Here's a quote from your reading on page 245: "Is the extent to which everything you watch on TV is a production." And they point out that even sporting events are produced. And if any of you have ever been in a sporting event that is being produced, then you know that they start at certain times and maybe schedule at certain times and things like that. I remember here at Georgia Southern when we played our first game on ESPN, it had to be scheduled at night, and so they didn't have at that time any lights in Paulson Stadium, so they had to rent some. And then it happened to be when Hurricane Hugo came through, so and they had to go on with the show, so the players were out there playing in the rain. So quite a production. So what does it mean to say television is character-driven, genre-based, and plot-oriented? Well, we'll start with the middle term. Genre-based, again, you have different types of TV shows that we can broadly categorize them into, that they're comedies or dramas or cop dramas or lawyer shows or medical dramas or what have you. So TV is very genre based, much more so than books are. We don't have novels that are about about the medical profession. There are some out there certainly, but we don't have an entire genre of programs like that that seem to have been having programs like that for as long as I can remember. Back in the 1960s, they had programs like Ben Casey, Dr. Kildare, and in the 60s or in the 70s they had Medical Center, and then in the 80s they had Emergency, and in the 90s they had other shows. So, okay, so it is very genre based. Character driven, it's very dependent upon the actors. And even in shows that don't have a continuous story being told week to week, that are instead what we refer to as episodic, that is, each story is self-contained. It has a beginning, a middle, and a conclusion, or a beginning, a climax, and a conclusion. That's typical of drama. But we do have the same characters from week to week. And of course, more recently, there have been programs like series like Game of Thrones or Breaking Bad, where you have the same characters in that are developed for weeks and sometimes for years. And of course, Game of Thrones was real good about killing characters off periodically. And then plot oriented, one way in which television has been criticized would be that, let's say in a sitcom, the issue for one particular program is that one of the teenage characters is discovered to have some marijuana or something like that, and then this problem is solved in 30 minutes. Or even if it's represented as taking, the show lasts 30 minutes, it might be represented as taking a longer time, but usually it's like maybe the next day or something like that. Whereas we know that when people have issues with drugs, it takes a lot longer for them to often work through that. So, but that's what we mean by character-driven, genre-based, and plot-oriented. Or in a cop drama show, the criminal was always caught by the end of the show. So. The chapter also brings up how we pay for television, and one way, of course, is by buying bigger and better televisions, and another way is by paying for cable TV or for streaming services. And of course, we pay for it in another sense by watching commercials. Even with free broadcast TV, which has become less and less of a part of our experience with television, unfortunately. And then, of course, we also spend our time, which is not only watching commercials and things like that to help support TV, but also by spending our time watching TV, we determine which shows are successful and which ones are unsuccessful. And so there have been the Nielsen ratings have been going on for I'm not sure how long, but I would say at least 50 or 60 years. And of course, today we have different ways of tracking who's watching what, especially with streaming services. Um, and of course, there's also this idea that what is there on TV is often as important as what is not on TV. And these are things that we can write about, especially. What I'm thinking about here with what is there that is as important as what is not. One example could be the television show Friends. You can see there in the middle is Oprah. Uh, the cast of Friends at one point went on Oprah's program, and the question that Oprah had was, "Why don't you have any black friends?" So, and of course, that it's even this is a television show that's set in New York, so it's a big city and it's very diverse. So that is certainly a reasonable question, and it's something that could be worth writing about as well. Okay, some of television specific concerns in terms of writing. I mean, there's a lot of different things we could talk about. I'm just going to talk about a couple here. One would be setting. For example, Breaking Bad was set in New Mexico, and there's a lot of scenes that are out in the desert. And so a question we might ask is, why is that? Why is Breaking Bad set in New Mexico as opposed to Statesboro, Georgia, or Boston, Massachusetts, or anywhere else, for that matter? I think one answer is that, of course, uh, Walter White is a criminal, becomes a criminal, a public school teacher who doesn't have the money to pay for his cancer treatments. Um, I could identify with that when I first heard about the show's premise. But I think another reason that it's set in the West as opposed in the East is that we associate the West with outlaws and uh, kind of a wild and free spirit. So, and of course, there have been many television shows. If you watch some of the cable channels that feature those in the 1960s, westerns were well, there were more westerns on TV than there were cop shows. This is the day of Bonanza, Gunsmoke. There was just a whole slew of them, and I think that's why. And so setting is important, and again, that's something that's worth writing about. Is Walter White the modern cowboy figure, kind of a rebel in a sense? Another would be costumes for both Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings. I've heard that the amount of work that was done on creating costumes was just tremendous. Now, George R.R. Martin has commented that a lot of his inspiration came from, for Game of Thrones, came from reading medieval history, medieval European history. So, but anyway, there's the clothing, which is so different from what we wear today, and weaponry and things like that. So all of these are ideas that can conceivably be written about. So how do we write about television? We've talked about a few already. One thing that the book focuses on is finding meaningful themes to write about. So, another could be writing reviews, and that could be of a particular show. It could even be a particular episode, or it could be of a series. And of course, Again, when we think about a series, we have to ask ourselves the question, is it episodic? That is each episode of the show a story unto itself, or is it something like Breaking Bad, where you have a character who at the beginning of the show is a high school chemistry teacher who finds out he's dying of cancer and decides to start making drugs in order to pay for his treatments, and we follow through until the end, um, when he's killed. Um, or you could write about the genre. You could write about how we render meaning. What does it mean that medical dramas continue to be so popular? Why is that? We have, as I said, going back to the 1950s, 1960s, we have shows about doctors going all the way up to the more recent present. We have shows like Grey's Anatomy, and it would be interesting to compare and contrast uh, those types of shows, and they're available. Okay, so those are some possibilities for writing about television, and this is my citations for my images. So you'll have some opportunity to write, at least on the discussion board in this module, about television.